Hour. CAHN Health Hour. Black GPs and senior consultants giving Black health advice, improving Black health equality. CAHN Health Hour.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to CAHN Health Hour. Apologies, Dr. Ayo is not today's presenter, but great to see great to see everyone. We have a packed morning and leading into early afternoon. This morning, we're going to have Dr. Adil, Dr. Kamara, we have Dr. Lanry, we have Dudu, who is Director of Public Health from Enfield, we have Riyadh, who is, they all introduce themselves, but the plan for this morning is a series of presentation, and that will be followed by a Q&A session. But at any point in time, if anything comes up during the presenters talk that you want to ask any questions about, please put it in the chat box. You can send private, questions as well. There's no silly question, so please feel free and let's engage. So at this point in time, we thought it would be good to start with some local context. So we're delighted to have, Dudu, who will introduce herself. She is Director of Public Health for Enfield. She will present the local data, and this local data mirrors what is happening up and down the country, especially for Caribbean and African people. So over to you, Dudu.
Thanks very much, Charles. And I'd really just like to take this opportunity to welcome everybody to this webinar this morning, to, of course, thank the speakers, but also most importantly, thank everybody who is joining to listen, to gain information about COVID vaccination and to get their questions answered. It's a really fantastic opportunity. I hope the session provides you with the answers that you are looking for to in relation to your COVID vaccination. I would certainly, as you'll be, you would expect me to say, I'd certainly encourage everybody to receive their COVID vaccination. It is the best defense that we have in our toolkit against COVID. And certainly it's the best way that each and every one of us can help protect ourselves. So I'd just like to give you a little bit of information about the Enfield perspective. So I'm going to show some slides just very briefly, just to give you a flavour of what's been happening here in Enfield. Bear with me whilst I share my screen. Sorry, my screen is not sharing. It did a moment ago when we practiced this.
I think, Dudu, it's sharing, but it's taking us to the end of the slide. So you need to just start from the beginning, but it's sharing.
Oh, yeah. Here we go. So is it sharing? It's sharing now, is it?
Yeah, but you need to,
Sorry about that,
right.
Everybody.
Yeah.
You'd think that I'd know how to work it properly by now. So I wanted to show you some of the information that we have around deaths that have happened amongst our Enfield residents. And I think, it's safe to say that COVID-19 has touched everybody across the nation, but we know that there have been some communities that have been touched by COVID more than others, so disproportionately. And when we've looked at that in Enfield, we can see here that amongst residents who've identified themselves as with Caribbean background or African background, as well as some others, you can see there is a disproportionately higher death rate amongst those communities. When we look at vaccine uptake, and as I mentioned before, the important point about vaccine is that it's our best defense in preventing COVID infection. I know that there's lots of small writing on here, but really what in relation to the Black African and Black Caribbean communities in Enfield, the green bars represent vaccination uptake. And you can see that there that it is lower than average for Enfield. And so this is something that we're really concerned about, because as we can see in relation, similarly to the rest of the country, we can see now that COVID infections are increasing dramatically and are likely to increase further as the society, the social distancing and other COVID restrictions release entirely. And really, we need to be encouraging everybody to have their vaccination, because otherwise there is a much higher risk of infection, particularly now in this time period where there will be no or very few restrictions left in place. We can also see that we can also see that geographically there is a disproportionate uptake of vaccination across our borough, so that communities down the eastern side of the borough have got lower vaccine uptake. So those are the slides that I wanted to show with you, just to give you a bit of a flavour of vaccine uptake and how COVID-19 has impacted on the Black community in Enfield. I just want to take this opportunity again to really encourage everybody to have their COVID vaccine. We all have the right to opportunities to good health and well-being, and this is one way in which you can protect your own health and well-being. There's going to be lots of opportunities to answer questions today, and you will hear from clinicians who have lots of experience in working with vaccination and also have got experience of dealing with COVID. But from a personal perspective, I would just like to state as well that I have had both my vaccinations. I have my husband, my parents, and I have been encouraging as well everybody who I love and care for to have their own vaccination. And I would just like to sort of expand that encouragement to everybody on this call and residents in Enfield to take up your opportunity to have the vaccination. We've got loads of different opportunities available at the moment. So there are 3 primary care sites that are taking, you can just turn up to have your vaccination. We've got a vaccination bus in Edmonton Green Shopping Centre today. And tomorrow that will be in Ponders End car park. And you can just turn up there. Even if you're unsure about having your vaccination, there's lots of people there who are at hand to answer questions. People will not be asked for any sort of private documentation or immigration status or anything like that. The main aim for all of this activity is really just to get people to have their COVID jab and be protected against COVID-19. There are no other sort of ulterior motives behind that, which is something that we've been asked many times, and I think is an important message to get across to everybody. So I hope you enjoy the session. I'm going to hand back over to Charles now, and please do put your questions in the chat and we will answer them as best we can.
Thanks very much, Dudu, for presenting the local context from Enfield. And for those who joined late, Dudu is the Director of Public Health from Enfield. So if you're local to Enfield, there are a couple of flyers, being posted in the chat box where the vaccination bus is available, but also a number of walk-in clinics up and down the country. So we also have a helpline if you don't know where your nearest clinic is up and down the country, then just drop us a text message to the helpline and someone will come back to you. But it's really important that we get the local context, and that is why what we do as CAHN, trying to increase the uptake. But also there's no silly question. We know there are valid concerns. We've been saying that all this while. So even if you want a one-to-one conversation with a clinician, we will arrange that for you. At this point in time, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mohamed Kamara, who is a consultant in emergency medicine. He will take us through a couple of slides about the vaccine, and then that will be followed by Adil, who was directly involved in producing the AZ. So over to you, Dr. Kamara.
Right. Hello, everybody. Let's hope this works. Right. Right. Okay. So, thank you for having me. My name is Mr. Mohamed Kamara. I'm one of the chaps in the front line here in Greater Manchester. We've been talking, quite a few times and for over 18 months now, and I've been asked to just throw some insight into what we're dealing with. And I think we all know what this is about. We all know what the COVID is, as we know, in 2019, it was first discovered in or recognized in China. And of course, we know the different types, as you were, it was called the coronavirus. And the alpha ones would give you the flu, which we all know about. And of course, the beta is what we know that will give you the COVID, as it were, 19. Now, people think this is new, but I could tell you there have been 7 so far that the world has noticed or witnessed, if you like, 7 types, and they're all there, as you can see. As we all know, there are 14 variants, including the Delta one, and maybe up to 15, because the Delta plus 1, I think, has been talked about. You can see for yourselves, there's the Kent, the Bristol, Liverpool. Brazil has got 2 variants. South Africa has got his, or its, if you like. And then you have Germany, you have the Texas one, and of course, as I say, 14 of them. The most recent one is the Delta variant. But it's important for people to understand that in the midst of COVID, there are other illnesses that are very alike, very, very similar, but distinctly different. So as you can see yourself, there is the seasonal flu we have, there is allergy, people that have the runny nose all year round, people that have hay fever, and of course the COVID-19. And on top of all that, you have the common cold. So all of them do share similar symptoms at the very beginning, but when you go on to the final aspect of it, you'd see that, things like fever, headache, pains and aches, fatigue and weakness, extreme exhaustion, stuffy nose, runny nose, sneezing and a sore throat vary. And you can see that for COVID-19, which is the most important one, fever is common, headache can be present, and we know that it is present from the recent data that we received. General aches and pains can be present, fatigue and weakness can be present, extreme exhaustion course, can be present, especially in the long COVID. Stuffy nose and runny nose has been reported and it is there. Sneezing has been reported, and of course, the sore throat has been reported. This is not by any means exhaustive, but you can see for yourself, So we then go into this most important aspect of it, which is the vaccine, which, as we all know, is a substance that protects human beings against certain diseases. It contains a dead or a weakened version of a microbe, which is an invasive organism. It helps the immune system to recognize and destroy the living microbe during a future, if you like, infection. But remember this is why it's put in red. Vaccines are not designed to prevent disease. They're designed to prevent disease. They're not to treat disease. So they're not by any means curative. They're preventative, and the preventative aspect of it is actually the most serious or the severest form of the disease, which will probably end up causing you to require additional, breathing facilities like ventilation and things like that. So the vaccine will prevent that from happening. So the disease that you would contract, or the illness that you would contract, might be not as bad to the extent where you would need to be put on a ventilator. That's what the vaccines are there for. It doesn't mean because you've had the vaccine, you will not contract COVID. I want people to be clear about this, because I know people who are double jabbed, but they still contracted it. However, they've never ended up on a ventilator. So the vaccine needs to be, decided what it is. It's the antigen. It's a killed or a weakened form of the virus or bacteria, which trains the body to recognize and fight the disease when you encounter it in the future. It has got adjuvants, that is additives, which help to boost the immune response and helps the vaccine to work better. The preservatives are there, which ensure that the vaccine stays effective. As you know, there's some of the vaccines, there's 6 of them. The 4 were very popular, very popular with us, but some of them do have to be stored in very, very low temperatures. And so therefore, you have to have preservatives when you thaw them out in order for them to be fit for storage and transportation. They also have stabilizers which protect the vaccine during storage and transportation. How do they work? Vaccines, we all know. So a dead or weakened form of the germ is introduced into the body, and this sparks your immune response to develop the antibodies, which remember the germ or the microbe, if you like. And of course, the antibody will fight off the germ if it invades again. So you get an antigen antibody complex, which is actually stored there, which is then one that would serve as a memory, and that would help to prevent you from contracting disease. So why do we think vaccines are safe? Well, all the vaccines are thoroughly tested to make sure they do not harm you. Yeah, it often takes many years for a vaccine to make it through to the trials and of course the tests. Once the vaccine is being used, or maybe given that tick of approval, that green tick, especially in the UK, it is also monitored for any rare side effects by the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA. And that is why when it was noted that the under 30s were prone to the very, very rare complication of clots, maybe in the leg, in the chest or the lungs, and maybe in the head, it was then sort of the course of the trajectory of the vaccination was then changed. In effect, where the under 30s were now offered not the AstraZeneca, which has been found to be the one responsible for that kind of rare complication, but they now offered preferably the Pfizer, or the Moderna, as opposed to the AstraZeneca. This is just in keeping with what I've just said, that they monitored. If there's anything that is adverse or untoward that is, intolerable to the human being, then obviously it has to then be addressed, and then steps have to be taken to prevent that from happening. So, people talk about vaccines, but probably it's important to understand why we do need vaccines in our lives. They're a safe and effective way to prevent disease, and they save lives, believe it or not. Yeah, we have vaccines available to protect against 20 illnesses or 20 diseases. and vaccines can save up to 3 million people annually. So think about measles, think about polio in Africa. I know there are people who are nowadays having knee replacements or hip replacements, because of polio. Now, it was eradicated from Africa thanks to the vaccine. Ebola, which devastated, our people in 2014 up to 2016, with 11,000 people dying, just in Sierra Leone. I can tell you there are 2 vaccines that were developed, so that in the future, should there be any outbreak of Ebola in those areas, people will be well prepared, a lot better than it was prior to that outbreak. So these are just the types of vaccines. You have the live ones versus the inactivated ones versus the recombinant ones, and of course the toxoids. As you can see, you have measles, mumps, rubella, rotavirus, smallpox, chickenpox, yellow fever. All of those are live attenuated vaccines. The inactivated ones are the hepatitis A, the flu that we have seasonally, polio we just talked about, and of course rabies, the one from bats and these dogs as well. So the subunits or the recombinant ones, you have Haemophilus type B disease, hepatitis B, human papillomavirus, which we know affects our young daughters and children, which causes, as we know, is high risk for the cervical cancer. And now, obviously, because of that, there's been a drop, 25% reduction in that, dreadful disease. Whooping cough, the mothers will tell you about this. Pneumonia, people with immune systems that are really not up to the task will tell you that they need to top up on the pneumonia vaccine. And of course, if you were going for pilgrimage or going to anywhere, maybe in the military or somewhere, you definitely have to have your meningitis vaccine, definitely. Shingles, we know, affects our elderly population really badly. In fact, I just saw one yesterday who was really, debilitated to the extent where she told me to cut off the limb, which obviously was really sad. But it just goes to show you that with vaccines, this can be avoided. And of course, you've got the toxoid ones, which are the diphtheria. And of course, as we know, it's a killer, diphtheria. And of course, tetanus, we know, is there in our midst. Well, side effects obviously need to be mentioned. We know that everything you do in this world has got side effects, whether be it medicine or even in our daily chores, we do have that. So like every other medication, there are side effects, but mainly they're mild. They're not long lasting. At most, they might last 6, 7 days, 4 days at that. Very rare, as we say, we get to see some things like we saw with the clots, where sadly we lost some people. But I can tell you that the chances of developing a clot is far higher if you take the oral contraceptive and if you're flying around the world from, for example, from Manchester to maybe Dubai or maybe Australia via Dubai. Your chances of getting a clot in the leg is far higher than if you were to take any of the vaccines. That is just to tell you that, the side effects are there, but this particular clot side effect is very rare. You can get headaches, low fever, pain or redness where the injection went through, but they're never long lasting. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people, and what they tell me is it floored me. Some people say it made me dizzy. Some people say it gave me a headache. For a few days, I had to take paracetamol and brufen and all that. But it got better, and I'm here to tell the tale. So I think that would be something of a very small price to pay if you were to be saved from this dreadful disease. So we then come to the vaccines that we're using. It's important to find out what it is that we're using. It's an mRNA vaccine, and it's a messenger ribonucleic acid vaccine. A bit of a mouthful, but it's mRNA, it's a messenger. It was first discussed in literature in 1990, and the clinical trials of these vaccines we talk about now actually took place when we were dealing with the outbreak of Zika, rabies, influenza, and the cytomegalovirus outbreaks. It was first tested in humans 7 years ago. And the preference over traditional vaccines is because of their safety, their half-life, which can be regulated, their immunogenicity can be downregulated, and of course, they're really efficacious, and of course, they're easier to produce. So these are the features and these are the characteristics which obviously make them stand out. People have always wondered, well, why is it we have so many illnesses and, HIV has been tested, has been cited. Some people talked about diabetes. Some people talked about some types of cancer and all that. But suffice to say that they haven't seen any vaccine for like 50 years, 40 years or whatever. But yet within 12 months, 18 months, we've got, more than 4 vaccines. Now that's one thing that is being probably the reason why people are hesitant, why the hesitancy is very high. But if you look at what we have here, normal vaccine development versus COVID-19 vaccine is quite clearly dramatized, if you like, or graphically illustrated here. If you see where you have sequential and where you have parallel research, you will see why it is we ended up with the COVID-19 vaccine coming up within 12 months to 18 months. You can see that normally we start with the animal stage, and then that's the preclinical one. And then of course we come on to the phase 1, which can last up to 2-3 years. Phase 2 as well can last up to 2-3 years. So phase 1, you have the least. So after the animal stage, you do then proceed to the human beings, which are volunteers, not mandatory, voluntary, And so when there's nothing much to be found in terms of adverse side effects, it moves on to the second phase, where you have a bit more people. And of course, if that is safe, then you move on to the third phase, which is then where you have a lot more people, hundreds of them, sometimes thousands. And based on that, they say that can last 2 to 3 years as well. And when it's approved after that, you then have the tick of approval to then give the order for it to be produced or manufactured, if you like. And once that manufacturing takes place, you then have it, to the population generally. This is what you call sequential. Whereas with this, you have COVID-19, it was a parallel one, whereby the world knew that it would be brought to its knees, people will perish. We don't want to face a situation whereby like we had with the Spanish flu in 1918, where 55 million people died out of 500 million people that contracted it. So you have everybody, coming together, taking off all the red tapes, all the bureaucracy, if you like, all the ethic, committees and all of those had to be removed. And of course, money was pumped into the research, and all the big bodies that do research in the world came together and decided to go forward. And that's why you see within 12 months, we actually received the seal of approval. And of course, we then had to proceed to manufacturing. Plus, you have to understand that although it's there, there's still the post-marketing surveillance, which we know is effective, as we actually noticed when we found out the rare side effect of AstraZeneca, where this was removed, and maybe restricted to the above 30s. And so there you go. So we talk about vaccines and how they developed. You can see yourself that polio, the bottom one there, from 1789, 60 years it took. And you can see what's happened with Ebola. 15 years from 1976, when it was discovered in Congo, and of course, within 2 years from 2014 to 2016, you have 2 of them that were discovered. SARS, again, the coronavirus, is SARS, and you had the first one, and you have MERS, and you have the SARS-2, which is the current one we're talking about. The first SARS, obviously, you can see no vaccine in 17 years. And MERS, which is a more dangerous one, a more lethal one, coming from the places like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Middle East, you could see that for 6 years there were no vaccines. Well, then with SARS, COVID-2, which is the current one, you could see that 12 to 18 months, we definitely had one. So it just goes to show you that when you take away all the bureaucracy, all the red tape, and you pump money, and everybody comes together, the ethics committee and all that, realize that, look, we have to do something. You can do things, and that's what this is. So there's no cover-up. There's no hidden agenda. This is just how it is, because we knew that the world as it is would have been brought to its knees had it not been for the discovery of the vaccine in record time. So you can see, these are the 4 that we know about in this country. There's 2 more, which is 6. As you can see, the AstraZeneca one, the top one there, is definitely like 3 quid. The Moderna is most expensive, 25 quid. The Pfizer is 15 quid, and of course the Sputnik, which is the Russian one, is 750. But as you can see, one thing they have in common is that they all need 2 doses for that to be effective. And as you can see, there are logistical problems here, because some of them have to be stored in very low temperatures. You see, the Moderna -20, and the Pfizer -70, and all of that has to be thawed, has to be transported, and has to be used within a given period of time, sometimes 5 days or maybe longer, slightly longer. But as you can see, the AstraZeneca one, obviously, can be stored in a fridge, and that is why some people actually prefer it. So obviously, the GPs can go, or the district nurses can actually go to the houses and deliver that. So as I said, 2 more, there's 6. The Johnson & Johnson and the Novavax, more or less the American ones, as we can see. But you can see that all of these are all 2 injections or 2 doses. There's only
Looks like we've lost Mr. Mohamed Kamara. Apologies, everyone. I think we're going to have to bring on Adil, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, I can take over. I believe the point he was going to make was just that the Johnson & Johnson actually only takes a single vaccination, so only need 1 shot. So that's the differentiator for that vaccine. But shall I go ahead and share my slides now? Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm assuming you can see me and see the slides okay? Fantastic.
Yes, we can.
So actually, Dr. Kamara did cover a lot of of what I was going to talk about, and so I think it was really it's good that he went ahead of me. So that means hopefully if you hear it again, it will sink in and make more sense, and maybe if I make any mistakes, he can correct me later. So just to quickly introduce myself. So my name's Dr. Adel El Tarabi, or Adel El Tarabi, and I'm a postdoctoral scientist at the University of Oxford, where I work in the Jenner Institute with Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, as she is now called. Effectively, I'm a vaccinologist, which means that basically we study vaccines. We make vaccines for various diseases. So it's an academic group, and we study vaccines, and this is that's our day job, if you like. Until this year, actually, no one actually would listen to me in dinner parties very much. I would be the boring guy who they would sort of go and try and find a tax accountant to talk to rather than listen to science. But this year has changed all that. Obviously, we're passionate about vaccines at the Jenner, and that's because, as Dr. Kamara has already highlighted, they do work. They are one of the greatest public health interventions for this globe. We typically, in a normal year, you would administer around about 4 billion vaccines, and that goes mostly to the newborns and infants, but also to the different age groups, the adolescents and the older adults. But effectively, that leads to between 2 and 3 million lives saved every year, and that's really helping to kind of drive down this burden from these infectious pathogens. It's worth noting that the vaccines that we make in the modern era are a lot safer than they've ever been before. So this is something that was sort of alluded to in the reason why it takes so much time to make a vaccine. No one needs an introduction to coronavirus anymore, but here's how I refer to it. It's basically bad news wrapped up in a shell. It is effectively this viral ribonucleic acid. This is the genetic material of the virus. This is the instruction manual for how to make a virus. But the virus itself is not a living thing, I would say. It's inert. It sits there. It's basically like a blueprint or a musical score. Until you give it to an orchestra, there's no music. So it needs a host cell in order to translate that message into the different components. The virus itself has is encapsulated by a membrane. This is like a lipid, a fatty layer that's protecting the genetic material inside. There's also proteins, viral proteins, which are decorating the surface of the protein of the virus and also inside. And they give structure as well as have key functions. And the reason why I'm giving this introduction is just to sort of, because I want to sort of explain why, we need to understand a little bit about the thing we're trying to protect ourselves against. We need to have some evidence of this. So when the coronavirus first emerged, the reports first emerged in December 2019, and they identified this pathogen that was causing these pneumonia in China. They quickly isolated the pathogen and sequenced it, reading out its blueprint, and from that we were able to detect the different parts, the different parts of the virus, and so this sort of very quickly led to many groups across the world jumping in and using their technology to make vaccines. So there's many designs, many different vaccines, but effectively there's one overall purpose, and that is to really train the immune responses, as the previous speakers talked about. So we would look for the part of the virus that we think is the most important, and we will try and intersect to block, to create an immune response against that part. So in our case, in Oxford, we took the coding sequence for the spike protein, which makes this protein here, and we put it into a harmless virus, which is it's based on the adenovirus from chimpanzees, that's been modified so it cannot replicate and it can't cause any illness. It wouldn't normally infect humans anyway, but so this is also advantageous in the sense that we won't be creating an immune response against the medicine itself, if that makes sense. That then basically delivers the message, this DNA, into the cell, that then translates it into the RNA, and that then makes the protein that then is displayed on the cells, and the immune response will recognize that and produce either an antibody response using the B cells, or a cellular response through the use of T cells or T lymphocytes. So that's the purpose of the vaccines, effectively, to train the immune response to say, hey, this is what you're looking for, this is what you need to neutralize and sort of intervene. The RNA basically skips out the DNA part and it just goes directly in and translates straight away. So it's a simpler method of delivering that same response. And then, as Dr. Kamara mentioned, there's also other vaccines which we don't have licensed yet or don't have authorization for in the UK. I think there is Novavax is close to being authorized. That's a sort of protein subunit which is actually delivering the spike protein with an adjuvant. And in China, they use this whole virus which is inactivated, and they've spread that across the world. So that's just to say that there is lots of different vaccines, but effectively they're all doing the same thing. They're introducing the body to a harmless piece of the pathogen that you're trying to have a response against. And it's worth mentioning that this has been the largest sort of concentration of human endeavor in recent history. There is never been more people working on one single problem than this, I would say, ever. We've poured in resources, i.e., the world pretty much stopped. So the only activity you could possibly do is look at ways to solve this problem. And that has resulted in, there's over 300 vaccines in development. And several of those, the lead ones we've seen are authorized now. But it's just to say that this has not been a singular effort. This has been a collective effort. Lots of different groups, scientists, different disciplines, all working together to try and solve this problem. And that's really sort of I don't think we had a choice. We had to do that. But But this has sort of led people to think, or to consider that maybe things have gone too fast. As was mentioned before, vaccines usually take a long time. I think the quickest one is mumps, which was done in 4 years, but typically, you could be looking anywhere between 10 and 15 years. And the reason is exactly because there's multiple steps involved. From the initial invention and candidate being selected, you do these early research studies. They're then tested in either cells or in small animal models. And these are preclinical or non-clinical studies. These are showing you that the candidate you've designed has the chance to work. And then from there on, it then would be a clean batch of this vaccine needs to be made in order to be used in humans. And that's where the clinical trials take care. And so this boundary here is not quite so trivial. You need to make sure that the technologies you use are able to be translated and to be made in a way that is safe and can be applied to humans. So that's one barrier. And then obviously the clinical trials themselves, phase 1, 2, and 3. The main question is always safety for clinical trials. We need to do no harm. But the first phases are precisely just for that. Then you look into maybe the target audience, and then you do a widespread, larger scale study with more people. Then once you have that data, you give it to the regulators, who will make an evaluation decision. And at that point, then normally we would start to look at scaling up the manufacture. And as I said, all the way through, we're monitoring the safety. So in normal times, that looks like this. And I think you've seen this before. And really, the delays are having to collect money and to report and to stand in a queue to go and apply for the next round. So all of these things, and also to recruit patients. Without the volunteers, these studies can't happen. And sometimes it does take a while to recruit people for these studies. And then obviously there's a queue. The regulators have lots of other medicines they need to look at. This is all very time consuming. And obviously, I just won't neglect to say that the cost goes up exponentially as you go this way. So there has to be a good reason and a commercial reason to be able to proceed. People don't want to risk things. Now, in the pandemic, it was very obvious that we didn't have that luxury of time. And therefore, it was decided that we would do whatever it takes in terms of we would risk money in order to try and solve the problem quicker, i.e. we will test many different approaches. So we have many different vaccines, all of them proceeding and going into early trials, and we will have the regulators involved from a very early stage. And this is actually this has been something that's been a key change in this particular trial, and this in the pursuit of these vaccines, and will, I think, be taken forward in future. I think having the regulators involved from an early time point has probably saved the most time, because they've been able to give advice and comment and see the data, rather than have to deal with a large stack of data at the end. They've been able to see it and monitor it as we go along, and that allowed them to make a very rapid decision to authorize for emergency use of these vaccines. The other thing I would say is that many of the manufacturers and many of the vaccine developers looked to ensure that their vaccines could be made at large scale early on, and they tackled this problem. And at least here in Oxford, this is something that our teams are very involved in. And before, we were able to then pass on that know-how and that expertise to AstraZeneca, for example. And then obviously, it doesn't stop then. Even after, there's this continual monitoring and studying of the vaccine afterwards. So just to reiterate, no shortcuts are taken in the production of these vaccines. Everything that needs to happen in order for a vaccine or a medicine to be authorized was done. As you saw, there was just overlapping, simultaneous, where things could be done at the same time, they were done at the same time. And also, there was prioritization. The COVID vaccines were given highest priority by the regulators. Something I wanted to sort of mention very quickly at this stage is just to also say something about the trials. Typically, in recruiting the volunteers is the most difficult part. But this time, because of the mass interest, these trials were able to recruit very quickly. I mean, we were able to recruit, thousands of people. I think in total we had around about 10,000, 11,000 people. And typically we'd only see maybe 1 or 2% from the ethnic minorities, but in these trials we actually managed to, the representation within our communities, the Black and Asian communities, were in excess of 10%. And actually I think I saw numbers that show that it was 17% for our trials, this is great news, because we know that these, the SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19, disproportionately affects Black and Asian communities. So we need to know that the medicines will work in those people. So if they were not involved in the trials, we wouldn't have that confidence. The other thing that gives us confidence is actually, now that we've given in this country in excess of 30 million plus vaccines, we can see that the real world evidence supports that these vaccines are helping to reduce the severity of illness and the transmission of disease. There are still people who would question the safety, and we've sort of mentioned the blood clot scenario, which it was poorly understood and wasn't clear. It seemed to be close to background levels. So if you, in a typical year, you'd have 300,000, but they're, blood clots for many different reasons. And in the early trials, when you're dealing with, as many as 45,000, 70,000 people in trials, those safety signals didn't occur. We didn't see any risks. However, when you start to vaccinate millions of people, then these very rare events now start to be seen. And from there, we could sort of identify these potential harms that we have recognized. However, one has to kind of take this into consideration. What is the risk of the harm to what is the benefit that this medicine can give us? And the data sort of that's collected, this is from earlier this year, is showing that for low risk exposure people, basically the risks in the higher age groups, is higher, it goes lower to the younger folk. And you can see that really the risks are very, very good. So the harms are quite low for the older people. So therefore it makes sense for these people to take the vaccine. However, it seems very similar for the younger folk. And that's why the advice was to maybe use alternative vaccines to the AstraZeneca vaccine for the younger age groups. However, I still would be happy to recommend AstraZeneca vaccines, because of, if that's the only one that's available, it's better to take a vaccine and rid yourself of the scourge of getting the infection or severe illness from the infection than the harm of a potential blood clot. Which would be double if you were to be infected by the real virus. So you would still have a risk of blood clotting if you're infected. So if you could halve that risk by taking the vaccine, you should do that. And obviously for higher exposure risk people, so people in the medical profession and people in frontline services, the evidence is more squarely, the vaccine is more beneficial. It is a complicated situation. There are many moving parts and we're talking here about the variants. Obviously, the good news is that this is actually a relatively slow mutating virus, believe it or not. It's an RNA virus. It mutates rather slow. However, it will accumulate over time. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to find ways to make itself fitter, better able to infect the host. Remembering that this virus, we think, when it emerged from China, looks to have come from, it's very similar to a coronavirus that came out of bats. And so humans are not its initial host, but it's somehow changed enough to be able to infect humans. And it will continue to change until it becomes better at infecting humans. But a virus, believe it or not, doesn't want to kill people, kill its hosts. It just wants to get in and replicate and propagate itself. So therefore, if it kills the host, it's actually failed. And so this virus is likely to get more benign over time if evolution is to be believed. But in the meantime, we have this risk whereby it could cause worse illnesses or more, it could evade the immune system. The good news is that the vaccines so far look to be helping us protect ourselves even in the light of these new variants. And this extrapolation I'm making from, if we look at the data of the infections from last year to this year, and you can see here in June, we're starting to rise up, and actually we're probably a lot higher now. However, the number of hospitalizations this year are much lower than they were last year. And that's really courtesy of our good practices and the vaccines. So there's hope there. I think that this pandemic has really raised a lot of confusion and mixed messages for our community in particular. I think that, the lack of clarity and the lack of, directed information has kind of let us down in some instances. I mean, and I don't just mean Black people. I would say actually all non-elite. If you imagine it's easy for a person who's very well educated and versed in something to kind of make an assessment, but actually even those people have been confused because of this massive information that we're being given and the ways we're sharing that information. So when the results were first trailing out, there was a lot of concern. When we talked about adverse reactions, people were worried that, oh, my arm hurts, I feel like I feel worse, I feel like I've got the flu or something. No, those are normal reactions to a vaccine. However, a severe anaphylactic shock is not a normal reaction, for example. And being able to educate people as to what is normal and what's not is a key part of, say, what CAHN is doing in other groups like them. So I think basically the infodemic is our biggest challenge here. I'll wrap up there, but just to say that vaccines do work. They work for a lot of other diseases, and I think they have proven themselves to be very effective for reducing severe illness to this particular infection. And it's worth saying that although we don't know the direct links between how the vaccine can protect, say, against long COVID, it is evident that if you are vaccinated, you're less likely to be severely infected, and therefore the likelihood that you develop some of the complexities that lead to long COVID will be reduced. And I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Adil, for taking us through the science behind the vaccines. That's really helpful. And for all those on the call who are not aware, we're live streaming to YouTube, so this will be available, and feel free to share with your family and friends. Lots of questions coming in the chat box. I think we lost Dr. Kamara, but he's back with us, and so in view of the time, and in order to make sure we take in the questions, we'll bring Dr. Kamara back. But I wonder if Dr. Lanrin wants to say a few words, and then I'm going to hand over to Ngozi, who is going to, facilitate the Q&A session. So I think, Adil, the other thing we did pose to you, which you might want to think about when it gets to Q&A time, how can you reassure people that this vaccine does work for Black people? We know there's low, uptake or involvement, from people from our community historically in clinical trials, but also some of the historic issues, whether Tuskegee or Pfizer in Nigeria, and all those things have contributed to the low uptake. So when we get to Q&A, it'll be good for you to touch on a bit of that. So I will bring in Dr. Larin before we open up for questions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm actually going to just be brief because I'm going to, as a local GP in Enfield, I'm going to distill it down to what I tell my patients, who are reluctant to get the vaccine. Because my two colleagues who have come before me have actually answered most of the question. I try to reassure them that the vaccine is safe. And I try to tell them that the COVID vaccine is safe, and getting vaccinated will help to protect against developing severe COVID-19 illness. I also try to tell them that any vaccine that is approved to be used in UK must have gone through rigorous scrutiny through the MRH. The MRH, which is an independent regulatory body, will not allow any vaccine to be given without it going through all the stages that has been described. And it's actually quite refreshing that the fact that many of the questions had to do with the speed. Why was it that vaccines were produced, takes 5 years, this was produced in 18 years, in less than a year. And we can see that has been really dealt with, because what normally causes vaccine to be delayed is the fact that they have to source money, they have to recruit, but this was going in parallel as opposed to going sequentially. So that is one of the ways I try to convince them to answer some of their questions. So I also tell them that the research has shown that vaccine reduces the risk of getting COVID, the risk of dying from COVID. It reduces the risk of catching and spreading the infection. And that the vaccine is actually available to all faiths. There is nothing in the vaccine that is innovative, or there is no gelatin or anything there to stop them from getting that. And that is that is the thing that I normally tell them, and that pregnant mothers can have the vaccine. Mothers who are breastfeeding, in fact, there's a study, over 90,000 pregnant mothers have had the vaccine in the United States of America. So it doesn't stop you from planning your family, from getting pregnant. And finally, I say to them that this is actually the only way, probably the best way, that we can get out of this pandemic. So I encourage everyone to actually go out and get vaccinated. There are, in the local Enfield where I am, there are so many ways you can get vaccinated. There is the regular vaccine centers at Evergreen and at Carlton House, and we now have the vaccine bus that is going about the community. So the best thing to do for ourselves to prevent infection, to protect ourselves, to protect our family, to protect our loved ones, is to get vaccinated. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lanre. So I am going to hand over to Dr. Ngozi, who facilitates the Q&A session. And I think Dr. Kamara will have an opportunity to touch on a few things that he missed out on when we lost him. So over to you, Dr. Ngozi.
Morning or almost afternoon. Thank you so much to Dudu, Mohamed, Adel, and Lanre for giving up your Saturday morning to join us and answer a few pertinent questions. And I think it's becoming more pertinent because, as we can see, the rates are going up, people are getting a bit more worried, and they've got lots of questions about the vaccine. So there have been questions in the chat box, which I can see, Dudu, thank you. You've been writing responses and responding to some of those questions. Some people can be a bit shy, so if you're worried about asking a question yourself, you can pop it into my chat box privately, and I can ask it on your behalf. So thanks to everyone so far. So one of the questions that have been popped in privately to me is, I think it was you, Adil, that put up the cost of vaccines. They range from about £3 to £25. Can we read anything into that? Are you being shortchanged if you go for the £3 vaccine? Is it an Aldi versus Waitrose thing that, is it better quality? Why is one £3? Why one £25?
I think that's a really great question, so Dr. Kamara actually put up the
it's me.
pricing.
Or was it you, Mohamed?
Which is, I mean, it was good, and I think it's important. So, I mean, at the Jenner, we were very mindful that we wanted to make a vaccine that would be for the world, and one of the things that we have seen, or what we know, is that for a wide used vaccine, it needs to be cost effective. It needs to be something that is affordable. By virtue of our platform and our technology, that we can meet that price point. The newer technologies, currently it's challenging for them to meet that price point. So regardless of the price, it's not, the more expensive something is, the better it is in the case of the vaccines.
I know that, but it's just, I know you see it, you just wonder.
So it's important.
There
are real differences, and I think that so if you look at the scale of manufacture and those type of things, that we're using established technologies, so it's easier to make viral vectors because those have been around longer and they're established. So Johnson & Johnson actually are very good at this. They've engineered their vaccine to be very effective. They can get away with a single shot. With the Oxford AstraZeneca one, we were originally going for a single shot, but when we used a subset in one of our studies, we showed that actually the booster, a second shot, actually gave a better response. And for that reason, we thought the better the response, the more useful it would be. And that's translated in real world in the trials as such. So
well, you can add something else.
So just very quickly, the efficacy that we're seeing from the vaccines is known. It's published. You know, we can see that, you know, the what we talk about efficacy, the how a vaccine works, i.e., blocking infection. They vary. You know, they go from between 60 and 90 something %. But actually, all of the vaccines, all of them, are close to 100% efficacious in saving people from severe illness and death, and you know, hospital.
So just on that point where you say severe illness and death, what about long COVID? Are there, I know this is new, so is there any information about the effect of vaccines on long COVID? Because we all know about that. It's much better for illnesses, for severe illness, much better for death. But the one thing that people are worried about now, and I find people saying that even though I've had 2 jabs, I'm double jabbed, I'm worried about long COVID. Is that a valid worry? Can I give that to Dr. Kamara?
Well, long COVID, as we know, I think 1 in every 5, according to the statistics that we do have, 1 in every 5 patients or people who suffered from COVID ended up becoming long COVID. Now, there is talk about the booster vaccine, I think we hear about in the over 50-year-olds that is being mooted beginning of September. That is probably to just boost the response, if you like, immune response. But in terms of, I don't know, maybe Adel might, El-Turabi might be in a better position about the data, because I'm not a vaccinologist, neither am I an immunologist. But as far as I know, I don't think the vaccine is geared towards long COVID, as it were.
That's fine. We know that it's not it's geared towards us trying to not have the disease, really. But these are the other things that seem to be coming out. So, Adil, do you have any information about its effect on long COVID?
I mean, my limited knowledge of long COVID is the sense that it seems to be more prevalent in people who've had more severe illness. So if you are able to mitigate against severe illness, then you should mitigate against, you know, the chance of long COVID. So if for the vast majority of people, they may get infected with COVID. The younger folk will probably have a mild illness and shrug it off. A very small proportion a proportion, and I can't say I know the numbers of heart, but they will suffer with long COVID. But those people usually have had more severe illness. And since the vaccines are able to prevent severe illness, one would expect that would be a way to mitigate against long COVID. Okay, so we can't say with any...
Can't say for sure, because the fact that it's long, these vaccines had quite a short period of...
So what is long COVID? Long COVID is effectively this malaise of symptoms that progresses beyond your initial acute illness, right? Yeah. So the chronic fatigue, or maybe pain, maybe there's other things. These things that you can't normally, these syndromes you can't normally tie down. That is really a sort of a signature of the immune response, maybe sort of still kind of having taken the wrong path in trying to fight the disease, and it's trying to get back into equilibrium, and it will take time. And we could
say that when we're trialing these vaccines, because we did have quite a short period, and that's one of the things people talk about quite a lot, is that we didn't really have enough time to study the effects on long COVID by its nature. The fact that it's happening many months after the acute disease, I don't think we probably have enough information to say.
And that's exactly my point.
Effects on long COVID.
That's it. That's exactly why I'm saying.
Yeah. However, but I think it does. I think you could make a reasonable analogy that since long COVID tends to follow people that had severe illnesses, and we know this protects from severe illness. But we'll see. But we'll see. I think all the time we're gathering more and more information about this disease.
I think we need to learn more what long COVID is, and I think we need to, that itself is a difficult thing to do. But for the vast majority, I mean, I would like to see the numbers on how many people who have had the vaccine. So we know that people who've had the vaccine have still been infected. So I mean, I know that there is possible to be infected. It's not 100% guarantee. No medicine is 100%
It's
guarantee.
not. I mean, when we saw the
you can still be
vaccine,
infected, but the point is that the
95%.
penalty of the, if say my aunt who's in her 80s was vaccinated, had she not been vaccinated, I wonder if she'd still be with us, because you know she was in
I think that issue is quite clear, that if you have a vaccine, it does protect you in a sense. I think it's the other, I think the data on that is really clear, and everybody's sure that it protects you from severe illness and death. I think it's things like long COVID. I'm going to move on because there are quite a number of questions. And Dudu, you're doing a sterling job of answering them in the chat box, even though you haven't said anything. But I'm going to ask you now, Dudu, what do you think? There's a question from somebody called Imo, thanks for your question. It's that whilst the scientific evidence for vaccines is quite plausible, I think, Imo, you might be a doctor. This is very technical, but anyway, it's a great question. It's worrying that the scientific community's exposure to drug pathology, decades of research, will not at least affirm the case for hydroxychloroquine. There's hydroxychloroquine. There's another one that I think it was something that was used for worms.
Yeah, for filaria.
Yeah. What was it? What's that other one called?
Cetamide or something like that.
Ivermectin.
Yeah, ivermectin. Have you heard of that, Dudu?
So
ivermectin, that's it.
Ivermectin, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that one, Dudu?
I'm going to hand over to Dr. Lanray to answer this one. It's not in my knowledge.
Not in your knowledge. Yeah, you're more public health, is it?
Yeah.
That's right.
Great. Lanray, have you heard about all these other things? Hydroxychloroquine?
Yes,
ivermectin?
Yeah, I've heard about it. I've read about it, but there is no the paper is not. They are not statistically significant. Ivermectin is still going through some trials, and they just recently did a meta-analysis, and it's looking promising, but it's not convincing yet. That's what I will say for now. It may be that it will be in future, but for now, the meta-analysis has not actually produced any concrete evidence that it's something that we can use. But people have said that there's a lot of fault in the meta-analysis, let me put it that way. So it's not been scientifically very well received in the scientific community.
Okay. I think it's important that when we hear stories like, because there's been a lot of rumors about COVID and all the treatments, when we hear all these stories about them, that we do make sure that they're backed up by rigorous science. Yeah. I'm an hematologist, and I can tell you that some of the wonder drugs have ended up causing quite a lot of harm in babies, because when they were first produced, people thought it was fantastic. So one is oxygen. So everybody thought oxygen was the panacea for preterm babies, and it ended up causing some of them to become blind, because we're using it unregulated. So it's really important that when we hear about these new drugs and wonder drugs, that is backed up by rigorous science and research, and that is done properly as well. So I have no doubt that they're looking into things like this, but when we hear about these things, it's important that we back them up. So I remember Charles sent me a paper, we said it was a paper that was written about ivermectin. And this paper happened to be a personal communication. So it was a letter to the BMJ. Yeah. And it was now in a local newspaper as being a research on ivermectin. So please be careful and back it up by science. Okay.
To support that, the cardiotoxicity of hydroxychloroquine has never been mentioned, and that's where the worry comes in. You know, the other thing, the ivermectin, as it were, is more something they talk about in America. That's, you know, in the US, that's where it's more profound. But even then, the CDC has not approved of its use, really. So we have to be really careful because of this information that is going on out there. All people do is they latch onto something and then it just gets produced and then, you know, continued. So it's important to remember that if the grade D or grade E evidence, it's not useful for anybody's practice and it doesn't change it in any way.
Okay.
And that's
here. So sorry, just to interrupt. Somebody's asked a question some time ago, so I just want you to address that. What does conjuvant mean? That might be more in your territory, Adil. It sounds like something that's within a vaccine.
Conjuvant or recombinant, yeah, that's it.
So an adjuvant is something, I don't know.
It's called conjuvant.
I think it's recombinant, that's what they refer to.
Person from Facebook that we might have to look it up and get back to you.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
An adjuvant is a helpful is some ingredient that's used to assist or to modulate or to help give an immune response. So if you have a very
Dudu, you were going to say, sorry.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether the attendee means conjugate vaccine.
Okay, conjugate vaccine. Do you have an answer for that?
So Adil, you might need to help me with this, but it's essentially talking about the nature of the ingredients of the vaccine. Adil, you might need to go into a bit.
I had that in my slides.
I can imagine why Adil's become really popular at dinner parties, as you said. Because, vaccines it's hot topics now, isn't it? And I've never actually met a vaccinologist until COVID. I've never even heard of one.
Exactly.
But, yeah, go on, Adil.
There's not many of us. I mean, there's quite a few. I'm not sure I know what a conjugant or so conjugated is.
What we'll do, I think what we'll do, we'll just park that. It was a question from Facebook.
Maybe just kind of write that to me again. I will. But there's lots of different. So there's vaccines which are have sugars on them bound onto protein.
Adil, if it's not something that we're clear about, there are lots of other questions.
Okay.
So now that I've got a GP, a hospital doctor, public health, and a vaccinologist in the room, one of the questions that Charles talked about was restoring public sort of faith, and there are deep-seated worries about this. And Dr. Lanre, all of you have talked about the rigorous testing that's been done, but we know that despite the fact that we've had rigorous testing in the past for medications, that there are things that have been done within the Black community that have been great. So when I go around talking to people, well, I really wish you'd have the vaccine. Someone to say Tuskegee, and it's still there, and it resonates with the fact that there are pockets of our community, even before COVID came along, that we look at maternal mortality, not great. We've got evidence that there were things done to Black people in the past, not great. So from that perspective, and if you want to reach out in the next 15 minutes to say, look, I know you've looked at all the stats recently, and we've continued to push this. I just want one message from each of you to say why it's really, really important to have the vaccine and what you've been telling people. So I'll start with you, public health. Good place to start, Dudu.
So I think my message is that we know that vaccine uptake is lower in the Black community. And I understand that there's lots of complex reasons why that is. However, there's a huge amount of research that has gone into this that has been governed in the right way. And we know that this is an effective vaccine. All of the vaccines that are licensed in the UK are effective in all of our different communities, irrespective of what ethnic background you happen to be from. I think what would be the key message is we know that vaccine uptake is lower in the Black community. The case numbers are increasing across our population, and those people who remain unvaccinated will remain vulnerable to COVID-19. And in actual fact, that in itself is a mechanism for creating wider sort of inequality within our society, whether that's because people have not been vaccinated and more people from Black communities become ill with COVID and long COVID. We know that is now a possibility because of the low vaccine uptake. And I think that's why, certainly from an Enfield perspective, I am really keen to work with our Black communities to engage, to address the wider inequality issues, as well as the low uptake in vaccination.
Thank you.
That's not one message, that's a whole lot, but
that's
I
great.
hope that helps.
That's great. Very clear, very succinct. It's, you know, I think one of the reasons why we have these sessions is so that people get a very clear message from people who are working in the field and know what they're talking about. Dr. Lanre, for you, just before you summarize, there is one question that just popped up, which I think both you and Dr. Kamara are well placed to answer. And this is, why is the incidence of COVID low in Africa?
Oof.
Reported incidence, would say.
I think that's probably one of the key things, is that in you know, in England and in lots of European countries, we've got really good reporting mechanisms. So we know about all of the, you know, we've got testing, we've got a good data collection system. So we know about cases. In countries that don't have those mechanisms in place, we don't know exactly what our prevalence of COVID is.
Yeah, the question didn't have the word reported. I put that in because that was my thing as well. Adil, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that actually this is, you were very right to put reported, and I think you've got to realize that if you don't look for something, you don't see it. And how do you look for something? How do you collect that information? It's actually a little bit more sophisticated than you would imagine, because it has to be checked and balanced against sort of a wider kind of, there has to be a bar which it goes against. So I think, for example, that we have very good data out of South Africa, where there are maybe more advanced healthcare services, which show, and so, you know, we get glimpses in more advanced African places, whereas if you to go to more, you know, poorer settings, it's more, you know, there are, you know, outreach and charities there, so they can do some monitoring, but the vast majority of Africa is unreported or not well reported. And there are lots of reasons for that, infrastructure being one, but they have, you know, I would say locally, you know, we have very good healthcare services in Africa. You know, if you want tropical medicine, go to Africa, you know, they do that very well there, but, you know, everything is written down, is in paper form. There are files and warehouses full of it. They don't have the digitization that makes that information readily available. But this is something that I think the WHO and lots of others will have to kind of, you know, will kind of take on board. And I think the African nations themselves are very keen to do this. But I think
it's important to do that, because whilst we know that the reported incidence might not be as high, one thing that's stuck in my mind in a sense is the mortality. So whereas here you know, I mean, death is either you're dead or you're not. It's a really good statistic. When you think about people who have families living in parts of Africa and the number of mortality you hear, it's not like when we had the Ebola crisis that everybody knew somebody who died, or when we had the AIDS pandemic. This time, if mortality is a marker, it's not there. Yeah. So whilst we know the data collection is not great, people aren't dying from COVID.
Can I?
Would you like to add something?
Yeah. Apart from the word the reported, maybe the reporting is not adequate. But the other thing we have to look is we have to think about the population dynamics as well, because in Africa we have people below the age of 60. The population is higher than people over the age of 60. So maybe it's not being reported, but because that age group below the age of 60, you have less mortality, even in Western world with COVID. And so they will have the illness, and they will treat one way or the other with whatever means. Maybe they are local herbs and things like that. So and they are not diagnosed, so they are not reported as COVID. So that may be an aspect of it. Also, some African countries have actually developed test and tracing to act because of the experience with Ebola. Because I know, for example, in Nigeria, when COVID first started, they have a task force that actually used what's the basis they've set for test and tracing for Ebola to actually, in the early stage, use that. So that may have helped in terms of test and tracing, and the reporting, like you said, is in paper form. It's not digitalized. So the population dynamics is also very, very important. We have very young population in African countries that can withstand the COVID pandemic. infection.
Well, for the skeptics, I think that question came up really because what I've heard, and you'd be asked about and say, look, I don't think COVID affects Black people. Might be a statement somebody will make because in Africa, people don't seem to be affected. But what you should understand is that one is about the reporting, but secondly is, I think, really important about the population. We even know that even in the UK, if the younger you are, the more protected you seem to be and seem to be able to not have as many long-term effects. And the older you are, the worse it is. So if you have a population that's made up of mainly young people, it might be that you don't have the same effects as in a population that has a wider spread of the age groups.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that those younger people who will survive infection will still be able to pass it on. And therefore, in order to break that chain, we need to do something. And draconian as it is, social distancing and lockdown, that's one option. But really, we need other solutions, and vaccines are really one of the strong solutions for that. So it's an important message that you've made there. I mean, Dr. Lanry made this wonderful case. It's the demographics that suggest, if you say, oh, mortality is low, therefore there's no problem. Yes, mortality is low, but it's only a matter of time. We care about our older generation as much as anyone else in Africa. You do not want this circulating. You want it gone. We want it eliminated. We want it eradicated if possible. But so the message is still one of, how do you want to deal with this? And the best way to deal with it is absolutely to take the vaccines.
Okay, well, thank you so much, all of you, and thank you for giving up your time. Lanry, I can see you're at work. You've
Yes.
managed to, so that's great.
The work of a GP never finishes.
The work of a GP never stops. But just before I hand over back to Charles, I'm going to ask Riyad Karim, who's the Assistant Director of Primary Care in Enfield for North Central London CCG, to say a few words. Thank you, Riyad.
Oh, thank you, Ngozi, and thanks for chairing that superb panel Q&A. Yeah, I support primary care, as you said, in Enfield, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to salute the 3 PCN GP vaccination sites. That's Carlton House, Evergreen Surgery, Winchmore Hill Practice, and our community vaccination sites for their emerging, absolutely amazing job in their Herculean vaccination efforts. And today I'd like to thank Charles and colleagues and the Caribbean African Health Network for this superb webinar. I mean, the Caribbean African Health Network, CAHN, is working very closely with Enfield Council, with Dudu in Public Health, and the Enfield Borough Directorate of North Central London CCG, where I'm involved, to encourage the uptake of COVID-19 vaccine in the Caribbean and African community in Enfield. Increasingly, the NHS, the council, community organisations and hospitals, North Middlesex, BEH are working together as we more and more work together as one team in an integrated care system that will have a benefit to our patients, we hope. And in particular, we've been working really closely with Pastor Nick Chandler and faith leaders, and Avetta McInnes, chair of Enfield Caribbean Association, and other community leaders in Enfield, and that's been amazing. So I think today's been an amazing session. It's been really informative. I've certainly learned a lot today. I mean, in terms of Dudu's local context, that was really very insightful. We looked at the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities, including the Black African, Black Caribbean communities, and also Dudu mentioned about the disproportionate uptake of the vaccine in some communities, including the low uptake in the communities I just mentioned. And that, unfortunately, will lead to more inequalities and puts these communities at risk. And so that very much kind of like spurred on the discussion and the presentation from Dr. Kamara from Greater Manchester. And so it was a delight for you to be here today, Dr. Kamara, and also Dr. Adel El Tarabi from Oxford Jena. So, I mean, we covered what is COVID, the science behind the vaccines, how vaccines work, that they are effective, that they're safe, and no shortcuts were taken. And we also had a discussion on long COVID. Dr. Lanry, what can I say? It's always a pleasure to see you, sir. And also, our local trusted GP voice in the area is really important for communities to listen to you. And communities do listen to GPs. And, you signaled how important it is for us to protect ourselves, protect our loved ones, take the vaccine, which is the best defense that we have. So, as I said, we had a fantastic panel discussion. I really hope, like as Dudu said at the outset, that we provided you with some of the answers that you're looking for. And we encourage all in Enfield and beyond to get vaccinated. Get your first dose, please, and do come forward for your second. Come along in Enfield to the Edmonton Green Shopping Centre today for the vaccine bus, or tomorrow. Have a look at all the leaflets that have been put in the post, or come into the GP sites and the community pharmacies. I've been vaccinated. I've had 2 doses. My family members have. I encourage all to be vaccinated as well. Protect yourselves, protect your families, protect your communities, protect our Enfield. And once again, thank you again for a really amazing session today. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you all. I'll just hand back over to Charles. Thank you.
Yeah. So before I say the final, final few words, I'm going to ask Dr. Kamara to touch a bit about side effects, because it seems one of the things that is not helping with uptake in the community is anybody who has the vaccine, whatever condition they develop, then it's attributed to the vaccine, unfortunately. So as someone in A&E, what are you seeing? But there was a question earlier on from Grace. A friend developed weakness to the left leg, difficult to bend in, and, it's been attributed to the vaccine. But I think throughout the presentation, what you've all been saying is every drug or any drug will have side effects. But what that hasn't been helping is anybody who has COVID, if they pass away, it's been put down to the vaccine. So what do you have to say to that?
As I said, the misinformation is as I say, out of this world. It's just unimaginable. I mean, I've had people send clips to me about the fact that at the site of the injection, they've used a bulb, and when they put the bulb on the site of the injection, it lit, yeah? And when they put the bulb on the other side, the opposite side where the injection didn't go in, it did not light. And all it was an energy bulb, which, sort of functioned on moisture. So if you have a wet arm, you would actually get it to light. Doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the vaccine site. So these are the things, just some of them. Some people will tell you, well, I had the vaccine and thereafter my leg got weak. Well, maybe if you looked at that x-ray, that leg and x-rayed it, you'll find out that maybe there was arthritis there all along, which you didn't know about. Most importantly, what we have from the World College of Emergency Medicine is the frightening aspect of the possibility of a blood clot. That is what is, as I say, paramount to any other side effect. Because of that, there is, I would say, an algorithm whereby when somebody comes in within 28 days of that shot, would then have their blood taken. And if the platelets, that is when you do the full blood count, which people call complete blood count in America, here we call it full blood count, where you look at the hemoglobin and all that. If the platelets, these are the substances in the white cells of the blood that would help with the clotting. If they're less than 150, and that person has got headache, or maybe shortness of breath with chest pain and maybe leg pain or leg swelling, then that person will then have their clotting done, what we call D-dimers. And the D-dimers, if they're above 500, then that person definitely would need to be scanned, and preferably the venogram, they call it, of the head, thereby, making sure that this person hasn't developed a clot. You can get headache, as I say, because it's a known side effect of the vaccine. But if you have headaches that are that bad, they call them thunderclap headache or sudden onset headache, clearly that needs to be investigated. And therefore we invite them, we do the blood test, and from there we proceed. If at all they need the clot to be dissolved, we can then, refer them to the center where they get that done. As I say, most importantly, the side effects are mild. They range from, tiredness, redness at the site, feeling like you've had the flu itself, but then obviously after 3-4 days, they wear off, But the one that people are particularly worried about is this clot. And as I say, there is an algorithm that we received from the College of Medicine, which we're dealing with, and it's been very effective so far. But to say people have died, well, of course, it would have been nice to understand that if we get to find out the reason why someone died, then perhaps we'll be able to learn from that and prevent any future deaths. That's why you have postmortems. That's why you have toxicology. And that's why you have, disease and, of course, the outcome, as we can see from other people's presentation. But it's important to remember that everything you do in this world would have a consequence. If you take a medication, each and every one of them would have a side effect. But I think the benefits of taking the vaccine far, far, far outweighs the risks of any complications that would actually stem from that. It's important to remember that the vaccine's benefits far, far, far outweigh the risks of any complications. And I want that to be the message that our people to remember. Without this, we definitely would have a bigger problem to face.
Great. So once again, thanks everyone. Our helpline is in the chat box. If you want to have any further conversation, we will arrange that for you. If you want to find out where the clinic is, then by all means contact us. If you live in Enfield, the bus is there. If you need, Dudu and Riyadh, as well as others, they've agreed if you need support to get to the vaccination bus or to get to to a walk-in clinic, then by all means let us know, and we will support you with travel, to go get your jab. So please spread the word. This is the only way we can, as a community, protect ourselves and loved ones and come through this, so that the work of Adil and all the others, but also, our doctors, Lanry, Mr. Kamara and others, will be worthwhile. So we all in this together. No question is a silly one. And, look after yourself, spread the word. And if you've had your jab, do a short video, send it to us, and then we will add it to our collection. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye, Charles. Thank you. Very informative. I'll see you again. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, 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 bye. Bye, bye.